Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And A Star is Born.
Or it isn't.
Well, I have not been looking forward to this, unbelievably. Yes. We're going to get right into spoiler territory. You're expected to know what the story is.
Yes.
This is a film that's been made 3 times before, so we're going to get right into talking about the plot details. The trailer, when we first saw the trailer, it was, a load of guitar-y, American-y, rocky country stuff with Bradley Cooper singing in these handheld, shaky camera things and telling Lady Gaga how beautiful she is. And I thought it looked absolutely awful. And I said as much to you at the time.
Yes.
But, you've got to go see it because it's a remake of 3 classics.
Well, it's a remake of one classic,
Okay.
The George Cukor 1954 version. I've seen...
Is the Streisand one not more fondly remembered?
No. Well, the thing about the Streisand one is that, for people of my generation, it was like an enormous hit.
Yeah.
And was it 1977 or 78, something like that?
Ish. I haven't got it.
So, I had friends in high school who went to see it like 10 times and... the soundtrack was everywhere, and, I think I might have gone to see it 2 or 3 times as well.
1976.
Yeah, so, but it's not a good movie. I mean, I tried to see it the other day.
Yeah.
And it's got certain kind of iconic things. The whole bathtub putting on the makeup thing is from that movie. And Chris Christopherson was incredibly beautiful. In that, very sexy. But then, kind of so is Bradley Cooper in this one, actually, I think.
Well, he is the director. He lets himself look amazing.
But actually, that's a compliment, because often people don't. And it is kind of important.
Well, okay, go on. I was going to say it's the opposite. The guy's all ego. Go on.
No, and actors have often talked about this, actually, because... being a director is like, you've got to look after everything from sound to light. So you're making so many decisions that actually what directors who are directing themselves most often forget is their own performance. And that's been, proven true in countless films.
Right.
So, to be mindful of how he's lit, and his own performance is a positive thing.
Yeah. How lucky that he doesn't forget to look after his
Stop
own
being
appearance.
snarky. Compared to other people who've directed themselves,
well,
it's a real issue.
I think the guy's all ego. He is. And actually, I think this film is... It's like a filmed humble brag. And I think that's what he is as well. He's a humble brag. It's basically this he has this thing that comes across to me of him and of this film of, this is just my wee little awards contender.
I don't agree.
I humbly offer.
I don't think that comes across to me in any of his other performances. In fact, he's somebody who became a star very late in life comparatively. So, he had more than a decade of doing bits and bobs and not working and so on. So actually, I just don't think that's true.
There's nothing that I've seen him in that I think he's improved. And to me, he
American Sniper.
He screams
The Place
ego.
Beyond the Pines.
I don't think he elevates any of those.
That film where he plays, he's schizophrenic or whatever with Jennifer Lawrence. He's incredibly good in that.
He was good in that.
American Hustle. He's incredibly good in that.
No, I don't think it was a very good film. I don't think there's a single thing he's been in that he couldn't be replaced in.
Well, I do. I mean, I can't think of how somebody else would have made that part in American Sniper. As kind of sympathetic as he did. So, I think he's the best thing about the film.
Okay.
So, and actually, I think that to me, on the one hand, he's generous, right? Because he gives most of the song things to Gaga. So she gets almost all the songs.
Well, not
and
quite.
And all the performance bits, yes.
No, he doesn't. He's got an awful lot of singing.
He's got 2 songs, one of which he sings this heavy rock fraction thing at the very beginning, and then Don't Let the Old Ways Die, or whatever it's called, which he repeats like 3 or 4 bars of, intermittently throughout the film. All the big musical numbers are hers.
Yeah, maybe. Okay.
So, and so I think that's kind of like an interesting thing that he's done, because in a way he's given most of the acting stuff to himself and kind of most of the performing stuff to her. So that's interesting. My problem with the film is very simple. I don't get Lady Gaga. So, I kind of it's not that I think she's not good or whatever. I just don't understand why, why. So the film is called A Star Is Born. I don't understand why a star is born, and I don't understand why a star died either, right? So that's the kind of the fundamental storyline that, as one of the two people fall in love, one, their star rises, and the other one kind of declines to the point that they commit suicide so they don't get in the way of the person they love's life and career. So, I understand why Lady Gaga might sell records, and why she's a performer, but actually I don't understand why I don't see her as a film star, and I find her dull to look at, and also kind of and very badly dressed. Especially after she's become a star. It's like the worst dresses of the year in this film. I don't understand, the idea behind them. But also, I just, she's not transparent. So she's always acting the way that you imagine Madonna acts with her dancers, right? That, she gives the impression that she's open or whatever, but actually there's a whole interior world that nobody has access to. And I feel that's the kind of performance that Lady Gaga gives. Yeah, it's kind of like a play performance. She's doing all the right things, but actually she's opaque. You don't know what's going on inside that person. She's somebody who's built her whole career out of hiding. So, what she communicates with is her songs and her singing, which I think they are very expressive, right? I can understand why she is a star with that, right? But, she wears costumes and, makes statements, and it's all about layering things on, right? And then actually what happens in this film is that all of that gets stripped away, but there's still kind of mask, right? Like, I just feel I don't have access to this person's interior life.
I agree. I mean, that seems to be like the whole Lady Gaga thing.
Yes.
You don't get in.
Yes.
I mean, not that I know that much about her, but like I'm aware that she's like basically made a career out of wearing meat.
Yes.
And makeup and wigs, and to the point where like that's sort of who she is. I mean, part of the novelty of her performance in this film, and to an extent that I think it's being sold as this, is that it's Lady Gaga without all of that.
Yeah, but
Lady Gaga without the makeup and without the meat.
No meat or makeup for Gaga.
You know what I mean? But like, so like the film, it's really aware of Lady Gaga being this whole kind of multi-layered sort of performed thing. That it's like part of the reason to see this is she's stripped away. You never saw her like this before.
Yes.
But actually, you feel like somebody needs all that stuff.
Well, actually, I'm not sure that she does. But really, the thing is that she's only expressive with her songs and her singing, right? As soon as she stops singing in the film, you have like, you know that something is happening, but you don't know quite what, and you can't see behind the eyes. I mean, kind of, she's not communicating the way that actors do. And also, she's not communicating the way stars do. Like, on film. So, for example, Bradley Cooper is so charismatic. You can't help, and I have a whole series of other problems with his performance, but you can't help looking at him. But actually, she's got to be doing something before you look at her. She doesn't draw your attention. I don't understand why she's a star on film. I don't get her.
Yeah.
And she doesn't draw your eye, really.
I agree.
So, and it has nothing to do with, with looks because, kind of, I mean, people used to say that about Streisand, that she wasn't beautiful. But I thought she was beautiful because, as Pauline Kael says, well, talent is beauty, and she was definitely a film star. You couldn't help looking at her, right? I mean, some people hated her, but kind of whether you hated her or loved her, she was a film star.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't get that with Gaga at all. So my problem with Bradley Cooper is that he over sentimentalizes his own performance. He's such a needy actor that he's always out to please. I mean, I noticed actually in one of the shots that he's got laugh lines over these, he's got these beautiful cheekbones, right? And he's got these laugh lines that extend over the Mount Rushmore of a cheekbone and then goes down at a certain angle. And you think it's because he's always trying to please. His whole performance is him smiling to try to please. Yeah, he never does anything. Like James Mason in the 1954 version, he's cruel and nasty and he's mean to underlings and, and he's a mean drunk, And so actually kind of he's not afraid, the actor gives a performance in which he's not afraid to be disliked. Whereas actually I think Bradley Cooper is afraid to be disliked. He actually, doesn't do anything nasty in this.
I kind of agree. I think, so this is a film about two awful people who are almost irredeemably awful.
Well, I don't think.
And they get worse when they're together. So that's not exactly the problem here. But I think the problem here is that you're supposed to feel so sympathetic towards these two. Like a lot of what's going on, they have their problems, and obviously their relationship is really toxic. But you're supposed to feel the romance of it all the time. And I can't sympathise with any of that. I couldn't.
I don't even know what attracted them. Because he says things like you're beautiful, and they have a love scene, and you can really what is communicated very clearly is that he's bowled over by her talent, right?
Yeah.
By her singing La Vie en Rose and so on. And obviously that's part of the attraction, but then everything else is really kind of not communicated very clearly. And from her point of view, you don't get the sense, like, in the Barbra Streisand version, for example, you got the sense that, like, part of the reason she was with Chris Christopherson is because he rocked her world sexually, right? You never get that feeling in this.
But the thing about the two people being awful, like, they're both insufferable, but in different ways.
I don't think he's insufferable.
I think he's insufferable. He's an absolute creep.
Why?
He's always touching her. Right when he meets her, and he's as you say, bowled over by her, he doesn't let her have her own space. She's always touching her. The first thing he does is peel the fake eyebrow off her, and she's kind of, okay, what are you doing? Then he touches her nose to reassure her that her nose is beautiful. Then he touches on the forehead for no reason. He gets into her room when she's asleep. How'd you get in here? Your dad let me in. Oh, great. But the film, like that, it's not bad to just have that in the film. But then the film seems to be saying that this is a woman who desperately needs a man to invade her space to give her confidence and to show her that she can be more than she believes that she looks like.
Well,
I found it really reprehensible.
I don't agree. And to me that's kind of that. None of those things were any problems in the film for me at all. And actually, I disagree about Bradley Cooper because I actually think that Bradley Cooper is great, and you completely understand what he's feeling at any given moment. He's got this face that is really, I think, transparent. The only thing is that the character, as he's written it, whoever's written it, and certainly the way that he's chosen to perform it, never, you see, that, what you were saying just now, if it was really true, would make for a more interesting character. Because actually, I think, he does things that are self-destructive, but he never does anything mean, or nasty, really. So he ruins her performance at the Grammys, but he doesn't mean to. Right, whereas I think in other versions they're nasty, cynical people. That's part how they've gotten ahead, right?
I haven't seen the other ones. We should probably say that as well. I was going to watch the other three, and I tried, and immediately I said I can't do this.
You have to watch the Garland version. Is one of the great masterpieces.
I thought I can't stand to. And
well, actually, I think you would have loved the What Price Hollywood. Because it's one of those 1930s films that's really cynical and really smart, with snappy dialogue and really kind of a commentary on the film industry of the period. and it's very short. So I like that very much. I also quite like the 1937 version, except and actually Frederick March is very good in it, and again, he plays a character who's full of himself and so on. But I just can't stand Janet Gaynor actually in the film. She's really kind of drippy and nice.
Okay, well, I don't want to forget the point that we were talking about, though. We were talking about Bradley Cooper being not doing enough bad things. Was it we were talking about? I can't quite remember.
Yeah, basically, he does self-destructive things that often end up harming other people, but actually, that he's not a mean person.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to say that I think it's more insidious than that. I think he's like the nice guy. Like, he's not outwardly an awful person and abusive, but there's this insidious aspect to what an awful person is, that he's so supportive. You're absolutely beautiful and you don't believe it, but I'm here to tell you that you are. It's like, I think maybe she doesn't give a fuck what you think. Like, why is he so important that, like, his opinion on what she looks like should take precedence?
But it does. And actually,
But it's not asked for, It's not like... like I said, this is like the...
No, but actually, I think there is a line.
This is the personal space thing. Like, he invades her
There's
life.
a line where she says, I show off my music and people hear me, and they're all very excited. And then they look at me and they're no longer interested. So it's an issue for her.
Yeah, but this is kind of why I hate her as well, because then, like, she lapses
Well,
up.
You're being unreasonable now.
I don't think I'm being unreasonable. I hated these characters, and honestly, I was having some of the worst times I've ever had in the cinema in this film. I genuinely was, because I found these two absolutely insufferably awful. And I remember that a lot of people said this about The Wolf of Wall Street, that, like, why would I want to hang out with these people? Why do I want to spend 3 hours in their presence? It's just they're indulgent and they're awful. But I think that film, had much more of a purpose. This, I felt the same way.
Well,
I felt like I cannot sympathise with anything, and I definitely
try an act of empathetic imagination. Because, like, when we came out of the cinema, there's a whole queue of people, which, for a Monday night 8:00 screening, or that it was going to be, or 7:30 or 7:45 or whatever it was, it's a film that's resonating kind of with a lot of people. So why might that be?
Well, these people who haven't seen it yet.
That's not true, because it's also been very well reviewed, right?
Yeah, but these people, I wonder how many of them were returning viewers.
Well, I think
maybe they'll all come out with having just as awful time as I did.
I think it's a film that I can very easily imagine having, particular resonance for a female audience and for a gay male audience.
I can see what you mean. I think it's a film that will, the soundtrack is going to be popular, and people are going to really fall in love. I think it's asking for that, but
I think there are things
such fodder.
I think there are things that heterosexual men can connect to as well. There's a whole thing about the relationship between fathers and sons, right? And there's the whole thing about kind of a relationships between brothers, and kind of, and brothers as fathers, and kind of different experiences of upbringing generationally, and so on. That I was very touched that first conversation with Sam Elliott and Bradley Cooper. When they talked about their father. Yeah.
Which I don't remember. Was that the one where he punched him, or was that before that?
No, it was before that.
Okay.
It was the very first one.
Right.
So
yeah. No, I mean, no, there was. I mean, the element, the Sam Elliott Bradley Cooper relationship, I did like. Well, at least I liked the point at the end where he says, "You were the one I idolised, not Dad." I like that. I mean, there were moments that worked on me, and actually, I think as the film reaches its final moments, although before it gets to the suicide, I started to like it more, and I resented that, because I think we've talked about before the idea of the Hollywood happy ending being basically you do that because if you leave people on the happy note, then you kind of forget everything. Like the most recent aspect of your experience colours every other part of it. And so you can show the most awful things, but if the ending is happy and hopeful, then that's the kind of tone it leaves you with, and it gets people back. And that's not. This film doesn't have that. It's not a happy ending, but it's a sympathetic ending, and I think it's doing a similar sort of thing because these people are awful, or at least Bradley Cooper is awful, I think. But then the film offers him this path to redemption through his rehab, and he seems to really improve.
We have to stop saying that word because actually I really disagree. I don't think he's awful, right? So for you to just assume that he is...
Well, it's not assume. I mean, it's my interpretation, my opinion. All this is my opinion. But the film offers him this path to redemption because the drugs and the alcohol are a problem, and it sends him to rehab after he embarrasses himself at the Grammys, and then he really kind of seems to improve, and his mind is less clouded, basically. And that's when Lady Gaga is sort of saying, "I wonder if you're going to be the same person, if you're even going to want to come back to me. Like, was it all the alcohol?" And he's like, "No, of course it wasn't." And then I started to really feel like that's when I really started to feel like that's what the true love is between them. Not that I kind of didn't accept it before, but I didn't feel it before. And I started to resent that like the film was playing this trick to try and make me forget how awful I'd found it up until then. But then the suicide.
It doesn't make sense in this movie.
I don't think it does, because there's another thing. We should mention my brother. My brother said to me the other day on WhatsApp, he says, "Have you seen A Star Is Born?" I said no, but clearly he had something to say. So I texted him earlier to say, "What did you think?" Before I'd seen it. And then I got out of the cinema and there was 22 messages waiting for me. The guy's got stuff to say. And he doesn't mind if we talk about it as well. And one of the things he said was he thinks he doesn't like the suicide because there's a kind of heroic feel to it.
Yes. I mean, you see, in the 1954 version, and indeed the other ones, the suicide makes sense not only because the guy's losing his career, but also because they can't live with themselves, because they're doing things that are so embarrassing, to themselves, that are so humiliating, right, that they just can't live with themselves. And it's rendered completely understandable, right? You can see why this person doesn't want to keep going on. But in this one, it's like, he's still got money, he's still got house, he's still got a career, even though, it's not as high as it was. So really kind of the only reason why he seems to be offing himself is because, he's potentially damaging her career.
Yeah.
And you think, well, whoever killed himself, to improve somebody else's career, right? Like not even life or anything, just it's just stupid.
Well, so the way it works in this film is that she's got this European tour coming on, which is and they make a point of like so early in your career, like this is amazing to be this successful this early, and her manager pays him a visit when she's not there, basically to say, while you were in rehab, we had a huge mess to clean up. And you don't appreciate how close you came to ruining your wife's career. So despite the fact he's been really working on improving himself, that gives him something to think about. And then she comes in and hugs him and says, "We cancelled the tour. Basically, I want to be with you. Like you're what matters to me, not the tour. You matter to me more." And so then it becomes he kills himself because he feels like he's ruining her career, as you say. And the thing is, in that scene where they're in bed together and she says, "We're cancelling the tour," all I'm thinking is just talk to her. Like there is a remedy to this.
Yeah.
Speak to her. Say, like your manager came round and blah blah blah, and I need to make the sacrifice of sending you on tour, and we'll see if we can still be together, whatever it might be. But like there is such a way of moving the story in a different way. He doesn't have to kill himself. It feels so manipulative, and it's just to get the ending, and it's just to keep the story the same as it was before.
It doesn't make sense in this movie. And also what I didn't like about it, by the way, is that, in the other films, you get an impression of how the industry, this fame industry, the film industry, and all that goes along with it, the creation of an image, the circulation of images, the need to change people's faces and names and all of that in order to kind of sell them to a mass audience. Part of the pleasure of watching all the other versions of this film is that you feel it gives you an insight into the machinations of, that industry and the construction of images for circulation. This one, you feel it doesn't,
It felt very superficial. This
Yeah.
occurred to me, like I was thinking, particularly when it got to the appearance on Saturday Night Live, and Ali's performance. The song that she sings is crap, right? It's this electronically produced, kind of. It's got no feeling in it. I mean, the other songs have feeling in them, right? When she sings on stage, when he drags her on stage early on, like she expresses herself, and it's really good, I think. And then by the time it gets to Saturday Night Live, like she's become heavily produced and she's doing dance routines, and like none of this was on the cards early on. And so you're thinking like is the point of this to be this awful, to express the cynicism and the lack of integrity in the music industry. But I don't think the film is actually making a point of that. It didn't feel like it was. It felt very superficial if it was.
Well,
It's not like it kills her music.
No, but I think it is superficial, but it was trying to do that.
Yeah.
Right, to be authentic and, to have integrity in relation to what it is you want to express.
It felt very cynical to me, the last song that she sings at the memorial for her husband's death.
Right.
I didn't feel emotion there. It felt to me like this is... all the music in the film, this is what it leads to, is about showing off rather than actually feeling something. I never felt like there was real heart in the music somehow. I felt like it was all about the being on stage and being the big I am and that sort of thing. I think the film pays lip service to the idea that it's artistic. Everyone's talking about it being, having a voice and that sort of thing.
Yes.
But by
I don't know. I mean, I've already forgotten the song. We've just seen it and heard it, and I've already forgotten that one. So I really can't.
Well, it wasn't the song specifically, but it was the performance. It was like Lady Gaga singing these perfect notes, belting them out, and it's like, but this is the thing where your husband's just died. Shouldn't you be crying through this performance?
Well, actually, I don't know. There's something I read somewhere where the music was recorded live, so it should be having those imperfections where it's not coming from the studio.
But what I mean is, like, the music is kind of perfect at the end. That's what I mean. Like, she's singing so beautifully, and like any other stage performance. But I'm thinking, this is a song where you're memorialising your husband, and this is the thing about the song that he wrote that she found and he never performed, and he wrote it for her. Like, she should be sobbing through this performance. It should be really imperfect, but it's not.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you see bits of that, but anyway, it's not communicated very clearly. I think the most interesting thing about that end is that it looks with her staring directly at the audience in kind of a confrontational manner. I may not be as beautiful or slim or as glamorous or whatever as other people, but I am a star. I'm interpreting that. I don't know. Okay, well, let's return to some of your brother's points. Let's see.
One of his first things is, I largely just think it's a bullshit, self-obsessed vanity project. Which speaks to rather what I think about Bradley Cooper.
Yes.
He says, Jackson Maine is just a nonsense character. I don't understand why I'm expected to understand him. What do you think of that?
Well, he's clearly not a nonsense character in the sense that there's been, 4 previous iterations of it, and a lot of them hold up. I think actually the Frederick March performance and the James Mason performance, they hold up. So I don't think it's the character, really. But this version of him, though? Yeah, this version of it I find very weak. So it's not the character, it's kind of the iteration of the character, the way this one has been fleshed out or not fleshed out.
Yeah.
So and actually I do think that, so you see, I'm not sure if I would say that it's a vanity project, but actually it is a film in which he gets to do all the feeling or all the emoting, let's say, right? Yeah, and
he's given himself an awards contender role.
Well, I think he is great at what he's doing. So, I kind of and he's definitely fantastic to look at. I mean, he is, I think, a film star. So, kind of, for me, the great pleasure of the film is looking at him.
And I think the music is good.
Yeah, and
like I say,
think
apart from that
music-
one song that I pointed out, the Saturday Night Live one, where I think it's making the point that this song is bad.
Yes.
I think the music is really good, and I like listening to it. I've got to say, I like the performances early on. I especially like the song that he sings to the drag queen. You know, where she says, he says, you know, make sure you look at me while you sing. I don't care what you sing, but look into my eyes.
You see the drag queen thing. I mean, if I can
let's talk about the
connect
drags.
that, right? Because one of the interesting things in this film is that it has. I mean, I'm sure there are really tiny walk-on parts, and I remember there's a backup singer and so on. But actually, it has no other female characters, right? She's the only female in this world that we see, right? And so there is the whole thing in the drag club, which is fun and, you know, la vie en rose and whatever. But I think actually that kind of, I mean, when you're thinking about the Lady Gaga character, and this is going to sound like a big criticism or a stereotype, and I don't mean it that way, but I do think, you know, that for a heterosexual woman to live her life, you know, exclusively in what we see with gay men in drag bars indicates or points to a problem.
With the film?
No, with the character.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you were saying, she, you know, about her being beautiful, or, you know, I mean, yeah. So I think kind of, yeah, to me.
What can you elaborate on what that problem is?
Well, because, you know, gay men or drag queens are not the only people to find shelter in these spaces. You often have a lot of young women, you know, who also find shelter in these spaces and, you know, become friends and, you know, with gay men and with drag queens and so on.
You mean the fact that she was the only woman in there? I thought you meant the fact that she only seemed to hang out with them as opposed to straight people.
Well, that too, both of those things.
Right.
You know, she doesn't have any heterosexual friends. Right.
But the first point you were making was that there should be other straight women in this bar. Really? Is that what you meant?
No, you know, not in the bar.
Right.
You know, but that she doesn't have a girlfriend, you know, to talk to, or, you know, kind of. I mean, her world seems to be a world of gay men and drag queens. That is, you know. And actually, I think that does point to, you know, a problem or a lack or, you know, questions of self-image and things like that.
So the flaw in the character, you think, is something along the lines of, if she doesn't hang out with women because she feels like low on the food chain amongst them or something like that?
Well, I mean, you know, I can't extrapolate those things. I'm just saying.
Well, no, it's all speculation, but it's an interesting thing to think about. As you brought it up.
Well, you know, this has a lot to do with, you know, her character's depicted as one who doesn't think she's beautiful, and, you know, who you know, who's not reassured, who feels damaged in some way. She doesn't have a mother. Blah blah blah. Anyway, kind of, I just think it's interesting that this drag queen bar is her world. It's her social world. Yeah. We see her at work with her gay friend, right? And then, you know, we see her at play, and then everything else is just Bradley, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, and that's after that. So it's almost like he frees her, you know, or no, free her is the wrong word, because actually they maintain the contact with the drag bar, and she's got her gay best friend and so on. But let's say he opens up her world.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway,
there is a feeling that, like, she is hiding in there.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
And in fact,
but that's something else I find distasteful about Bradley Cooper's character.
Why?
Well, the idea that, like, he's there to save her, you know. But like I say, in this insidious way of these fake smiles.
But actually, what's interesting about the narrative of this film always is that it's not like that. So, you know, the man always helps the woman's career, and the woman tries to save him, which actually I think is also something that I didn't like about this film, because actually she really doesn't put much effort into it. She doesn't do much to save him. She doesn't, you know. So that whole affective dimension of, you know, in which any two people in a relationship, you know, you'd see kind of more. I mean, she's actually quite harsh with him. Get your act together, blah blah, you know, from now on you won't do this. So I didn't like that. I just thought it wasn't human, really. That's not the way people are.
Something else my brother says is these kind of films are actually kind of out of date now, so it just looks odd.
I think the problem for me with this film, and that might relate to what your brother says, I mean, I don't think the story's out of date. You know, it's been done every 20, 30 years. You know, it's been massively successful every 20, 30 years. I think it's going to be massively successful now. So, you know, there's an audience for it. I think in the sense in which this film feels out of step or maybe out of fashion for me is that, you know, mass media has changed and so has stardom, right? And, you know, who is a star and what is a star and what stardom is constituted by in our contemporary world is really different than it was in Barbra Streisand's day as a film star in the 70s or Judy Garland's, you know, in the 50s. And actually that it doesn't give us any insight into that. The idea is, you know, that they're big singing stars and that that's somehow the way that stars always have been, right? Rather than it being something new. I mean, there's nothing, for example, about going viral or the internet or
There is
digital...
that one thing, that first performance when he dragged from stage and then her dad and his mates are talking about
See
that's
on
how many
YouTube.
views.
Yeah,
you know.
okay.
So there's a little bit of that. But
Yeah, but it's also a set of cliches. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
can
yeah.
you imagine if somebody like, you know, because let's just change race here and say, you know, because if you say something like Kanye or Beyonce or whatever, you know, the fact that they need to go onto Saturday Night Live to make any kind of career statement is absurd. You know, so the film doesn't give you insight into it, you know. So I think that's it's in that sense that it might feel old-fashioned.
Let's talk about one more thing, which is because we haven't really talked about the aesthetics. We haven't at all talked about we've talked about the plot and the characters and the performances, but what about the way it was shot, the way it was filmed, the way it was edited?
I mean, I didn't mind any of that, though. The thing, you know, about me is that, you know, I have studied the 1954 George Cukor version, and it's so precise and beautiful, and kind of everything is motivated by meaning and feeling, that this just seemed like, you know, they put 50 cameras and they edited together, you know, often largely in terms of close-ups, right? So one of the things that I did like very much about the image was that it had a kind of a depth to it in terms of look,
Yeah.
right? You know, so it was very beautifully lit, particularly when it was Bradley Cooper's face, you know, and it has like all these amber tones. So I liked the lighting very much. But actually, in terms of having a mise en scène or whatever, it did in many ways seem grabbed footage edited together. So this had moments where, you know, kind of when Bradley Cooper was in a state and you'd have the musicians kind of in the background rendered almost into elongated. Yeah, what's that? What's the French sculptor who does these long odd shapes?
I don't know.
It's like all of the figures were kind of like twisted into kind of elongated figures, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And I noticed actually that recurred several times, right? But other than that, to be honest, I didn't see much. Anyway, let's wrap it up here. I was very disappointed. I had very much looked forward to it. You know, because I love almost every other version, actually. Well, every other version, you know, even though, for example, the 76 version is not very good, I still love it.
I mean, I don't feel that bad that I had such a horrible time, because, you know, I was expecting to, and I don't think my expectations clouded my judgment too much.
Yes.
I feel like I would have had a bad time no matter what.
Well, you definitely would have, but, you know, for me, it was like I did have high expectations, and the film was very disappointing. It's still going to be a huge hit, and I think it's a film that people are going to talk about for a while, actually. So, but don't go in with too high expectations, because I think you will be disappointed.
We're eavesdropping at the movies. We're on iTunes, SoundCloud, on social media, Facebook and Twitter, and we're on YouTube as well. And eavesdroppingatthemovies.com, and Jose's already running off to make a cake. Bye-bye.
No, I mean, it's not cake. I'm very hungry.
Okay.
It's 9 o'clock and I haven't eaten.
He's a hungry boy. Bye-bye.